Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, the Western Conference Final is set. We're going to preview the Wolves-Thunder matchup, what the biggest keys are for the Wolves toppling the leagues, the NBA's best team throughout the season. How can the Wolves win this series? We'll break down both sides of the ball next.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to us by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Happy Monday, everybody. Hopefully you had a great weekend, and we now know the Timberwolves' opponent in the Western Conference Finals. It will be the Oklahoma City Thunder, the league's best team throughout the regular season by far, really. A 68-win team that had like the best point differential ever, the whole thing. Like, this is a tough matchup. The Wolves are really big underdogs, actually still surprisingly big underdogs. We'll break everything down today. I want to get into keys on both sides of the ball, why the Wolves have a real shot to win this series, and I'll give a prediction. I think I'll wait till tomorrow's show to give my final prediction, but I mean, the Wolves don't match up terribly with the Thunder, and I'll explain what I mean by that. Kind of things to watch on both sides of the floor. Working on setting up, hopefully, a crossover episode with Rylan at Lockdown Thunder. That would be Tuesday's show, and if we aren't able to do that, we'll definitely talk later this week. Games every other day throughout this series, no 2-day break. So we'll be having games hot and heavy here starting tomorrow. Before we get into everything, a big thank you off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. All right. There's so much to break down here. And we always have to start with the regular season series and then kind of set it aside for reasons, right? I'm going to hit this quick because I want to get to like the biggest keys, and then we'll kind of circle back to some of the details from some of these games, because I think the headline here is 3 of the 4 games between the Wolves and Thunder did not have Rudy Gobert and Julius Randle. And that to me is huge. And they were all relatively recently, as in like February, right? The first game was back in December. So that was so long ago that, what do we really glean from that? The Wolves were healthy for that game. The Thunder were mostly healthy for that game. They didn't have Alex Caruso. But like, that was an 8-point Thunder win back in, I think it was December. December 31st, Christmas Eve, New Year's Eve. And then the other 3 games were all in February, and it was in the midst of this rash of injuries for Minnesota, which was the only time all year they really had significant injuries. And not only did they not have Julius Randle or Rudy Gobert, they also didn't have Dante DiVincenzo in any of those games, in any of those 3 games. And in one of them, they were also missing Mike Conley. So what do we take for the regular season series? Not a whole lot. There's a couple things that I want to get back to later, but I want to say that first. So like, if you look at the regular season series, you're like, 2-2. Yeah, it wasn't, just like nowadays it's so with all the rest and stuff, but these were legit injuries. And the Thunder were missing some guys at times too, but they had like SGA played in all the games, Ant played in all the games. So at least we have that. So we'll dig into that a bit later, but I think it's most important off the top to dig into what the overall keys are. And OKC, like, to be clear, they were like the league's best team in virtually by virtually any measure. And that obviously makes for a very daunting challenge for Minnesota. They had according to Cleaning the Glass, the number 1 defense by far. And I talked about this the other day, that last year Minnesota's defense was number 1 in the league, and it was the second biggest gap between the best defense and second best defense in the last 20 years, next to like a Spurs team from like 15 years ago. They were 2.1 points per 100 possessions better than the league's second best defense. Well, the Thunder were even better than that this year. They were 2.5 points per possession better than Orlando, which was the league's second best defense. And almost actually 3.1 points better than the league's third best defense, which was the Clippers. So OKC was number 1 with a bullet defensively. They were just fantastic. Offensively, they were number 2 in the entire league, according to Cleaning the Glass. They were about 1.5 behind Cleveland per 100 possessions, but they were ahead of Boston. They were ahead of Denver. They were ahead of the Knicks. League's number 2 offense. So number 1 defense, number 2 offense, number 1 in point differential by far. net rating, however you want to look at it. They won 68 games in a really difficult Western Conference. They have the presumptive MVP in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Like, this is, make no mistake, a tall task. And by the way, the line for game one as of right now is 7.5 points on FanDuel. OKC's favored by 7.5. And Minnesota's got a massive rest advantage. They haven't played since Thursday. So they'll have 5 days off. OKC will have 1 day off in between. That should be a huge advantage. Now, of course, the Wolves lost game one against Golden State with the big advantage there. And OKC was at home for game 7. They get to stay at home. They're not traveling. Minnesota had to wait to travel to OKC until presumably Sunday night. So there is some travel advantage there. But make no mistake, Minnesota they're big underdogs for this series. But I actually don't hate the matchup. But here's where I want to start. The Thunder on defense. I've already said this. I've already set this up. They're by far the league's defense. They're historically great defense. The best point differential, or the best gap between 1 and 2 defense in the last 21 years. They're fantastic. However, some of their issues line up fairly well with some of the Wolves' strengths on offense. And the most obvious one is corner three-point shooting. I know that's a really specific example, but OKC was actually dead last in the league in terms of allowing corner threes. They allowed more corner three-point attempts than any other team in the league. And Minnesota was 5th in terms of frequency of taking corner threes. Now, why is that? Well, OKC obviously takes away the middle of the floor. That's the easiest answer. And they're really aggressive with their athleticism and length on the perimeter to shut down, above the break threes, to shut down mid-range opportunities. Like, they're good in all those areas. I mean, you name a guy, and, between Lou Dort and Casey Wallace and obviously SGA, Alex Caruso, like, you name a guy, and they're aggressive on the perimeter and do a really good job of shutting you down in the middle of the floor. And so it's obviously somewhat by design that they're not letting you get to the rim with frequency. They're not letting you succeed at the rim either, which as long as we're talking about, I should also mention, part of this design is OKC does not allow that many attempts at the rim either because their perimeter defense is so good. They're 7th in rim attempt allowance defensively. Only 29% of opponent shots come at the rim. Believe it or not, OKC is number 1 in terms of defensive field goal percentage at the rim. They only allow opponents to shoot 61.9% at the rim, which is nuts. It's nuts. Minnesota as a team is 12th offensively in terms of percentage at the rim, 67.4%. And we've seen Ant have problems finishing in the playoffs. We've seen Rudy actually have, a couple really good games, but besides that has struggled at the rim as well. And that kind of comes and goes for Gobert. But OKC defends the rim well. They defend the paint well. They defend on the perimeter well. What they do give up, you have to give something up, is corner threes. And it's an interesting proposition because for the longest time, that's what offenses have been looking for in the league, right? In theory, it's the most efficient shot is a corner three. And OKC gives them up, but they don't give up much else. And the Wolves shoot corner threes. They're 5th in corner three-point frequency in terms of attempts and 9th in accuracy. Along with this, I should mention that part of what's driving OKC's defense being so good, at least well, I shouldn't say driving it because it is a legit great defense. So I want to be very careful here if OKC fans are listening. I'm not at all suggesting OKC's is a lucky defense. That's not what I'm saying. They've had some good fortune in terms of opponent three-point percentage. I buy above the break, a lot of that being just these guys are athletic, they're long, they're getting into guys. It's a little bit like the Wolves defensively. Like the Wolves do a really good job of contesting threes. That's not like a lot of times defensive three-point percentage can get explained away as like, they've dodged some bullets. That's true to an extent. And obviously you could dig a layer deeper and look at wide open percentage and how teams are shooting when they're wide open or slightly guarded or closely guarded, right? But another way to look at that is above the break versus corners, frequency versus accuracy. OKC gives up the most corner threes, but opponents only shoot 38.4% on corner threes, which is the 12th best mark. So they're giving up a massive volume, but teams aren't actually shooting that well from the corners. So it means a couple of things. One, there's been some good luck. And two, they do a pretty good job of still getting out and contesting, but they're late contest. Teams are still shooting these shots against them. So making corner threes, first of all, getting to the middle of the floor is going to be huge for Minnesota. And that's going to be a hard thing to do against this perimeter defense. So there's a couple other layers here I want to talk about how to break that down, how to generate those corner threes. And there's two other things when the Wolves are on offense that I think they can do to exploit this Thunder defense. And I truly believe this. There's like 3 things they can do that OKC is not great at on the other side, on their side of the ball, on the defensive side of the ball, despite being such a overall impenetrable defense. There is some positivity here in my mind related to the Wolves offense in this matchup. So we'll get to that. We'll talk about the other side of the ball as well. We'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors at Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it is easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery. That was my thing, was sometimes on the weekends, it's late and I'm hungry or whatever, or, out with the kids doing stuff, picking them stuff up, but I want to eat something different later. Easy to fall into the habit of food delivery and overspending there. But with Monarch Money, you could budget smarter, save more. And really the other thing is the all-in-one convenience. Instead of juggling multiple different apps for, to track your finances, you can use Monarch to do all of it. You can track your spending and even plan out long-term goals. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKDOWNNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKDOWNNBA for half off your first year. Okay. So Minnesota needs to find a way to generate corner threes in this series, which is easier said than done because of how good the interior of this OKC defense is, how good the point of attack defense is, with all of the players that they have that are so incredible at the point of attack. And like, I don't know exactly how they're going to match up. They're obviously a very switchable defense. But you go on down the list, like obviously Lou Dort is the best of them. SGA's really good, can actually be a weak link for them overall, because you consider some of the other guys between Dort, Cason Wallace, Alex Caruso, both Jalen Williams are effective defensively, but obviously on the perimeter side, Jalen with an E, with an AE, Jalen Williams, J-Dub on the perimeter. And then of course we talked about the rim protection. Like, this was the number one defense at the rim in the league, and Chet only played 32 regular season games. Chet Holmgren did. They've got overall strong rim defense, and it's because of their size and athleticism across the board and their activity level defensively that they limit those attempts, and they actually stop you from scoring when you get to the rim as well. So what are the keys for Minnesota? I think one is Ant needs to get to the middle of the floor, not allow himself to get trapped on the sides of the floor. He can't get stuck on the wing. And I know he likes to dribble to the wing on both, like, he really likes to get to that above the break. We know he likes the above the break three going to his left. That's his favorite spot on the floor outside the arc. He's got to be careful because we've seen him get trapped there in the last couple of series when teams are aggressive blitzing him. OKC is just going to try and turn the Wolves over. And that is my biggest concern when the Wolves have the ball. And that should be an obvious thing. OKC was best in the league at forcing turnovers, on cleaning the glass. If you're not a regular listener, I make that differentiation on Basketball Reference. I think they're second, but cleaning the glass takes out garbage time. They take out end of quarter possessions that are heaves. So I like to use cleaning the glass for these rate-based stats. Okay, so he was number one in the league at forcing turnovers across the entire year. It wasn't quite as good late in the season, but they were still top 10. And again, for the season, number one. Minnesota, we know, coughs the ball up. We know that's been an issue for Minnesota throughout the season. Yes, they've improved a little bit. But Minnesota finished the year actually 18th. They improved quite a bit. 18th in turnover rate. They were bottom 5 for much of the regular season and got much better. That was an issue in some of the regular season matchups against OKC that we'll get into a bit later. But Ant can't allow himself to just dribble into a corner or dribble into a situation where the sideline is the third defender and he's trapped. And it's not the only one, but he's going to have the ball in his hands the most, and they're going to be the most aggressive with Anthony Edwards. Nickeil Alexander-Walker has it. They might, just because of the handle. The handle's a bit looser, so they might say, okay, let's blitz. Let's judiciously blitz Nah and try and force him into a mistake. That could be a thing if Ant and Conley aren't on the floor. We've seen teams get aggressive on Conley. We saw that with Golden State a couple of times, trying to turn him over with a sudden blitz on the perimeter to try and steal a couple possessions here and there. That's the type of thing that OKC is going to do. But in order to get to combat that, get the ball to the middle of the floor, and then ultimately to the corners for corner 3-point attempts for Minnesota, Ant Ant has to be able to turn the corner, get to the nail, and distribute, make good decisions. It can't be dribble to the side and make a skip pass across to the weak side corner. That's going to result in a turnover and a bucket the other way for OKC. They're awesome at that. They run in transition. They're going to turn defense into offense if you give them the opportunity. That's what they want to do. The other thing is in pick and roll. Now, OKC is a great pick and roll defense. Of course, they're great at everything defensively. They were, top 5 in terms of points per possession against pick and roll. But when the Wolves run a pick and roll, if Rudy on the short roll can make a quick decision and the right decision and can understand which corner is going to be the best corner to distribute to, who the best shooter is and what the coverage looks like defensively, Rudy on the short roll has been very effective throughout his career, even in Utah, at catching the ball essentially at the free throw line, turning and making the right pass to the corner. As long as he doesn't, as long as he picks the right spot and isn't turning it over, that's a way to get a really good shot with the interior pressure, the pressure in the middle of the floor that OKC is going to put on the ball and try and keep you from getting to the rim. Having shooters in the corners like Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Mike Conley and Naz Reid, that's going to be a really, really important thing for Minnesota. And I think that, again, smart decisions by Ant, quick decisions by Ant, and also by Rudy Gobert are going to be super important. So defending the corner three is number one, because OKC was worst in the league at allowing corner threes. Again, they were 12th in corner three-point percentage defensively, so they defended okay, but they allow the shot. And maybe if that's just a late closeout, maybe it's a pump fake and go. We've seen Jaden do a lot more of that than just letting it fly, and that's obviously that's probably now the scouting report for McDaniels is try and make him shoot the three instead of now that he's comfortable putting it on the floor. Don't close out super hard to Jaden. Make him pump fake the three, then try and drive, and then, get stuck, put himself in a bad spot. If I'm OKC, that's what I'd do with McDaniels. But if you're Conley, Alexander Walker, Naz, Dante DiVincenzo, these guys have to let it fly from the corners. The other thing on the offensive end of the floor for Minnesota would be offensive rebounding. OKC as a defensive rebounding team is 21st in the league as defensive rebounders, according to Clean the Glass. They only had 28.6% of defensive rebounds. Minnesota, we know, offensively was very good the second part of the season. They were top half. I think they finished 14th in the league in offensive rebound rate. We've seen that come and go a bit in the playoffs. They've put less of an emphasis on it. I think it's been more, hey, let's slow the game down in a lot of cases. And that should be the idea here is get back in transition, and we'll talk more about that. But the Wolves have an opportunity on the offensive glass. If they do play big, say Chet Holmgren gets into foul trouble or Hartenstein gets into foul trouble or only one of them is on the floor, Minnesota, well, size-wise, length-wise, these teams are similar. Minnesota's got more beef between Julius Randle, Rudy Gobert, even Naz Reid, really, when you compare him to, not Hartenstein, but, to Chet. Like, they've got more length and like width, we'll call it, or body type-wise, more beef is a good way to say it, than OKC does. And they've got the ability to rebound the basketball really well. That's just not something OKC is good at on either end of the floor. They're hovering around 20th on both ends of the floor on the glass. Minnesota has every opportunity to generate second chance points, and they're going to have to find the right balance to strike between crashing the glass and generating second offensive opportunities and getting back in transition against one of the league's best transition teams. OKC is 6th in pace. They're 9th in transition frequency, and they're I think they're first in terms of points per possession in fast break opportunities. So striking that balance, and in my mind, if you're Minnesota, you have to take that gamble. I actually think Minnesota has to try and generate some additional offensive opportunities on the glass because of how good OKC's defense is. They're so good, you have to give yourself as many bites of the apple as you can, and just know you may get burned in transition if you mess it up on the offensive glass because they're going to run anyway. Like, they're going to run after makes. So at that point, yes, it's a goal to try and slow down the OKC transition offense, but Minnesota has to give themselves more chances offensively by offensive rebounding the basketball. And that's going to be really important in this game. I think it's a gamble worth taking. My last thing when the Wolves have the ball is to try and generate free throw opportunities for a couple of reasons. One, OKC does foul a fair amount. For a really good defensive team, it's actually surprising that they are 26th in defensive free throw rate. They allow opponents to shoot 21.1 free throws per 100 offensive possessions. That's a lot. Or per 100 shots, excuse me. That's a lot. Like, they foul quite a bit because they're so physical, and there's a bit of a, hey, they can't call everything mentality. That benefits them in the playoffs because the officials have allowed more stuff to go. They have allowed more, like, just called less fouls in general, right? And we've seen coaches from Finch to Kerr to others complain about the physicality being allowed. Minnesota can play that game. They just can't get sucked into complaining and worrying too much about it. And I know Finch said something in the regular season about how you can't touch Shai and all this stuff. Like, he actually had a quote about how SGA's essentially, I'm paraphrasing, but officiated differently. I think his quote was, you can't touch Shai, and so that makes it difficult. Curious to see how that plays out in this series. I think we're going to see at least one Chris Finch technical, if not multiple across. I don't think he'll, coaches don't get ejected in the playoffs. Hopefully I didn't jinx it, but I think we'll see a couple Finch technicals because that's one of his things is like SGA's grifting for some of these foul calls. And don't get me wrong, he's good at it. It counts. Free throws count the same no matter how you get them. Ant plays through contact. And while it's annoying how much Ant complains, he bounce contact. He, first of all, is athletic enough to avoid contact. And then when he gets contact, he's strong enough to finish through it. And so he doesn't get the calls. I've said this many times before. It's the Shaq syndrome. He's too strong. And so he's finishing through this contact and not getting these foul calls, whether he's making or missing the basket. And the problem with Ant is that he complains about it. And he's gotten a little better at getting back defensively, but it's still an issue. So if you're Minnesota, be physical, play through the contact. If you're getting to the paint, getting into the paint, getting to the rim with frequency, you'll get some of those foul calls. And the second thing that will do is it'll slow the game down a little bit. OKC wants to run, and we'll talk more about that. But getting to the line, trying to get more free throw attempts is going to slow the game down overall. I want to put a bow on it by talking a little bit about the other side of the floor and then hit like my 3 keys to the series, which is a bit of what I've already talked about, but I want to like summarize it kind of cleanly here. Like, here's what the Wolves need to do in the series. We'll do all that here next to close out the show. Okay, we've talked about when Minnesota's on offense, when Minnesota's on defense. The things you got to look out for OKC, which again was the number 2 offense in the league, they love to shoot from the mid-range, which is interesting given that they were the second best offense in the league, but they've got some guys that are really, really good at it. OKC on offense was number 2 in frequency of long mid-range shot attempts. And they were number 6 in terms of all mid-range shot attempts. 46%, more than 46% of OKC's offensive shot attempts are coming from the mid-range. That's crazy in today's NBA. 46% for a team, I should say, for a team that's as good as they are in today's NBA. And they've got to, like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is almost 55% from 10 to 16 feet. J-Dub is 52% from there, and he doesn't shoot quite as many from there as SGA, but he shoots quite a bit. Long twos, SGA is 42% on twos over 16 feet from the rim. Alex Caruso, again, doesn't shoot a ton from the mid-range, but he's really good there when he does. Like, they've got guys that will get there and will make the shots when they do. Lou Dort's another example of that. He's decent from there. But SGA is obviously, SGA and Jalen Williams are the two that you got to worry about the most. And a little bit of that is like, it just is what it is, and you live and die with it. And Minnesota does live and die with a lot of mid-range shots, but it's tough when he's like the best, one of the best in the league at it, and he's drawing fouls on those shots. SGA is unquestionably the best in the league at drawing fouls on mid-range shot attempts. And Minnesota has to be really careful. They still have guys that are very susceptible to getting drawn into the web. Jade McDaniels, even Nickeil Alexander-Walker. That was a problem. Jalen Clark played a bunch in the series against the Thunder this season due to injuries, and that was a problem for him. Minnesota has to be very, very careful there. If they make a tough contested 2, fine. He's going to. He's really good. He's likely going to be the MVP. SGA is. Don't foul him. Don't get an and one, because he'll get a couple and ones in this series off mid-range shot attempts. That's just what SGA does. Minnesota has to remain disciplined there, and that's how OKC scores. It's transition, it's mid-range jumpers, and it's getting to the free throw line. Now, in terms of getting to the free throw line, it really is only SGA. Like, the only other guy that gets to the free throw line with any frequency for this team is Jalen Williams. Chet Holmgren actually is pretty good at it on the offensive glass and just, getting the line a bit when he's banging on the offensive glass, and he gets a couple of offensive boards per game and turns that into free throw attempts. But SGA is obviously the primary concern there, and to a lesser extent, J-Dub. And Minnesota has to do their best to defend without fouling, get back in transition as much as they can, And again, it's that balance of how much do you crash the offensive glass against the league's best defense, who's also not a great defensive rebounding team, versus how much you get back in transition against the team's best fast break team. Which herein lies, this is something I want to break down more on Tuesday. And if Ryland from Locked On Thunder and I are able to do the crossover, we'll definitely talk about this. What does Minnesota do in terms of their lineup? Do they stay small and try and beat the Thunder at their own game? Rudy didn't play in 3 of these games. Minnesota won 2 of them. And their big comeback in the fourth quarter of the last game of the season against OKC. Remember, they played that back-to-back. The second game was in OKC, and on Monday night, they were down 24 in the fourth quarter. Ant was off the floor for much of the comeback. And it was a comeback that was led by TJ Shannon. Rob Dillingham was on the floor for it. Nickeil Alexander-Walker. It was the long athletic wings that were getting out in transition, running, generating turnovers, forcing mistakes by OKC, swarming on the perimeter, forcing the ball out of SGA's hands, making other guys shoot, which we'll talk more about that on Tuesday too, is that recipe of what allowed the Wolves to win that game in overtime. I don't think Chris Finch is going to be like, all right, Rudy's only going to play 20 minutes, so we're going to put TJ Shannon and Rob Dillingham in the game. That's not something Chris Finch would do. But I think if game 1 gets off to a rough start and say they're down double digits in the second quarter, like what happened in game 1 against Golden State, put TJ Shannon out there, just see what happens. Because now the scary thing there is TJ Shannon is probably a worse version of everything the Thunder have. And I love TJ Shannon, and I think he's a rotation guy. I think he will be next year. He might be a starter at some point in this league. But he's certainly not better than a Lou Dort, right? And maybe he certainly offers more offensively. But overall as a player, is he better than the others for OKC, if you will? I don't know that he is, but his playing style is going to fit the style of the game. So the worry there is, do you try and beat the Thunder at their own game with young guys like TJ Shannon, like Jalen Clark, probably not, but Rob Dillingham would fit that category? Or do you play your game, play big, and say, all right, with Rudy and Randle, we're going to bully ball you guys and we're going to win? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. Now, again, that's the big question. I think the Wolves will try and do what they've done. And Chris Finch did push some buttons, pull some levers in terms of, mostly playing big. But hey, Naz is a better fit in this Golden State series, so Rudy's only going to play 27 minutes or whatever. And choosing and picking and choosing the right spots to make that swap. And I think that's probably what he does again. I don't think it's going to be a drastic lineup change. I don't think it's going to be anybody getting benched or getting kicked out of the rotation. Maybe if you're down 2-0 in this series, going back to Target Center, maybe you have to at that point. You have to look at doing something a little bit differently. But again, who played and who didn't is such a big thing in this regular season matchup. Everyone except everyone on the Wolves side played in the first game, which OKC won by 8 back on December 31st. Everyone on the Wolves side played. OKC did not have Chet Holmgren, and they did not have Alex Caruso, and the Wolves lost that game by 8. And that was when Minnesota was up at halftime by 6. They were up 12 early in the third quarter, and then it was turnover city. Minnesota turned it over 23 times. The Thunder won that game. The next game, Minnesota won by 15, and the Thunder had everybody except Alex Caruso. They did have Chet Holmgren in that game. And like I said, SGA played in all those games. Naz was awesome. He had 27 and 14. There was no Rudy. There was no Randle. And there were actually no Conley in that game and no DiVincenzo. And Minnesota won easily. They were up 13 after the end of the first quarter. It was in Minnesota. Ant posterized Chet Holmgren. That was great. That was a really impressive performance by Minnesota. Then they lose the next game against OKC, which is a week later. Conley played, but still no Dante, no Randle, no Rudy. And Chet did play in that game. OKC wins by 7. The next night on a back-to-back, Holmgren did not play. Still no Randle, still no Rudy, still no DiVincenzo. And Jalen Clark started that game for Minnesota. Naz Reid started the game for Minnesota. Luka Garza, Joe Ingles played rotation minutes off the bench in that game because the Thunder went to his zone and Ingles was the zone buster. Kind of sort of worked for a short period of time. And that was the one where Nickeil and TJ Shannon and Dillingham and Naz Reid, those guys keyed the comeback. Ant was off the floor in the fourth quarter, got banged up a little bit. They kept him off the floor, brought him back. He finished with 17, 13, and 8, but it wasn't a great Ant game. And Minnesota wins that one in overtime. So some of their best success against OKC in the regular season came with Ant off the floor, weirdly enough, but more importantly came when they played smaller and when Chet wasn't in the game. And so this is the most fascinating thing about the playoffs is how do you adjust to the other team's strengths versus your own strengths? And your own weaknesses. How do you try and hide them? And this is where the Chris Finch coaching piece is going to be massive. And he did such a good job I thought in the first round and the second round to a lesser extent because it was a bit less of a challenge against Golden State with no Steph Curry. But I thought for the most part, Chris Finch has made the right decisions in the playoffs. And this is going to have to be a coaching masterclass to beat this Thunder team. Pushing and pulling in the right ways in this matchup. Real quickly, my keys, and we'll dig into a couple of these things a bit more on Tuesday. We talked about controlling the pace. The Wolves cannot play too fast in this series. OKC wants to play fast. You could be judicious with pushing the pace against Lakers and even the Warriors a little bit. You can't do it against OKC. You just got to be smart. You have to run a smart, deliberate offense. It doesn't mean play isolation basketball because then you get trapped and you turn the ball over. But be patient, get to the free throw line, pick your spots, get into the teeth of the defense, and make a smart pass to the corners for threes. Get the Thunder in rotation, and they're very good in rotation. They're a great defense. Don't get me wrong. But it gives you some opportunities to get open shots and to get to the free throw line. And then on the other side of the floor, you have to dominate the boards. And you have to at least give consideration to dedicating yourself to the offensive glass, understanding OKC is going to score in transition, but you have to take that risk because of how good the set OKC defense is anyway. So if you can score off of an offensive rebound, do that. And then also, can you play small? Can you give TJ Shannon some run in this matchup? Or are you going to play into the Thunder's hands by putting a less experienced small ball guy out there against such a formidable Thunder team? All great questions for this series. Tomorrow, I want to look a little bit more at some of the different lineup combinations that could work. I want to dig into a couple of these things a bit deeper. I'll give a prediction, hoping to have the crossover episode with Rylan at Locked On Thunder. So we'll do all that on Tuesday's show. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also download the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku or Amazon Fire TV and watch there. And also for your second listen, check out the Locked On NBA Big Board show. Believe it or not, it's draft season. Minnesota has a first-round pick. Obviously not our number one concern right now related to the Wolves, but go check out the Big Board show. NBA draft expert Rafael Barlow reacts to every workout, interview, and rumor leading up to the draft, which is only like a month away. Find Locked On NBA Big Board on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen. Of course, Locked On Wolves is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. We'll be back on Tuesday. Get you ready for Tuesday night's Game 1 from OKC. I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.